What's good, everybody? You already know it's your boy, the real AG here, back at you again on the Lockdown Defense Sports Network. Now, if you've been keeping up with the content up to this point, first of all, we thank you. And second of all, then you already know that me and the Hit Squad have been reviewing and previewing each and every team's moves, additions, subtractions, anything that they did to prepare their team for the ultimate preseason and 2025 season. And, just like a little Thanos snap there, we are in the thick of it already. A lot of teams, we already had the Hall of Fame game. A lot of teams are entering week 2, maybe week 3 of training camp. And we got a full slate of games coming up here this weekend for the preseason. So before we know it, it'll be week 1 of the regular season and everything will be laid out on the table. But, before we get to that point, let's look at, how teams are doing as our resident insider for the kingdom. That's what we're going to be looking at, how bright things are in Chiefs Kingdom and where things are at for them at this point in training camp. So, first and foremost, inside look at Chiefs training camp. I think Andy Reid made the overall theme or message of this preseason pretty crystal clear, in his very first press conference. He talked about there just needing to be urgency, and that being the theme here. And that urgency is, urgency to get over the Super Bowl loss and just how last season went. Urgency to get this offense back to that explosive prowess it used to be known for. And I think just an urgency to get back to their traditional winning ways, that they've been able to do for, arguably the past decade up to this point. So, that's really the overall theme. And I note that just because, as I kind of always feel like I preface in Chiefs videos when I cover my squad here, and you can tell me I'm wrong. But if you do, you're only just being a blind hater up to this point. But in all reality, I, as a Chiefs fan, I think any football fan up to this point can expect the Chiefs to continue doing what they're doing or have been doing until it doesn't happen. So until they fall flat on their face in a regular season, I am always going to expect them to do, like I said, what they've been doing for the last decade, competitively competing to win their division or win their division as they've done for 9 straight years, competitively being at the top of the AFC conference and competitively being in the hunt for the Lombardi trophy and getting to that game and ultimately winning the trophy. So until those things don't happen in a regular season for Kansas City, that's what we can expect to see out of this team, or at least they get very damn close to that point. So, I think that Reid's message for this preseason is a good one, just given the history and where they've been. Like, they know what they need to do. They just got to wash their hands with how last year went and get back on track, standing on business, baby. But so overall theme, like I said, is urgency and, just figuring out kind of where those new pieces are going to fit into the machine here. So, I think ultimately this is going to be a very exciting preseason for Chiefs fans or just football fans. And I say that just because when you look at kind of how this run's been for Kansas City, for the most part, they've always taken this, run it back type of approach where they just return a lot of the same guys they've been competitive and successful with, and just hope they can kind of flex seal some issues in the roster around that and just keep things status quo. And we really haven't seen, a big roster shakeup like they've done this offseason heading into 2025. Ironically, or maybe not ironically, the last time they did a major shift like that was, after the Super Bowl loss to Tampa Bay, where we kind of saw them do a lot of the same stuff, retool the O-line, retool the secondary, bring in a lot more younger depth pieces and see what they have. And so, with all that, we know how the runs went after that Tampa Bay loss. So as a Chiefs fan, I'm just excited to see where this young core fits into the already established core of players and just where the Chiefs go from here in terms of their success. So, like I said, going to be a really exciting training camp, preseason, and I think ultimately 2025 season. But let's not put the cart before the horse too much there. But looking at the latest headlines of training camp so far, um, as with any football team, I mean, injuries are always going to be a headline, always going to be a cause for concern. We've already seen, Xavier Worthy had a concussion scare last week, which was definitely more last week's news, but felt it was important to note nonetheless. He did ultimately clear protocol, was back to practice on 8-1. But, Xavier Worthy is certainly going to be a key component to returning this offense to its explosive prowess, and just a player of what he brings to the offense and how important he is. I mean, injuries and any frailness he's dealing with is always going to be an alarming thing to watch out. So always going to be watching out for Xavier Worthy's health. Are really any of the key players, but and there are other injury concerns with the Chiefs right now. Just looking at who didn't practice on Wednesday, that's August 6th. You got linebacker Drew Tranquil was out with a back issue. Hollywood Brown out with an ankle injury. Fulton, the corner they signed from the Chargers, out with a knee injury, and tight end Jake Brenningstool, the UDFA from Clemson, has been out with a hamstring injury. So not a whole lot of injury concerns with the team at this point, but still present nonetheless. Second thing is, obviously everyone knows or has been monitoring the Rashee Rice legal situation. Everyone at this point should know that there is finality in the court system in terms of that. And, we saw Goodell drop the suspension on Addison this week. So, I mean, I think at this point it's a matter of when, not if, will Rashee Rice get suspended and for how long. But up to that point, I mean, and while that's still pending, he is going to be full go this preseason and, running with the ones and just seeing what the league ultimately decides to do with him. This last in the next headline here, just a little bit for fun, maybe just to piss off people that hate the Chiefs a little bit more, but we got Travis Kelce, the movie star, maybe already kind of being featured in roles, and had I guess a pretty exciting week one of preseason, kind of getting to premiere Happy Gilmore 2 to the team. As if you've seen it at this point, he's in it, although pretty small role, but exciting nonetheless, just for a guy from KC who's balled on the field to get to make it into Hollywood here and there, and potentially turn that into his second gig when he's done. But and then like I've kind of noted already in the first slide, but offense has been working on returning to that explosiveness and being more explosive, specifically in the passing game. I think every recap I've seen from training camp practices has noted just how you could see the emphasis on Mahomes being more decisive in deeper passing concepts and kind of finding who those targets and weapons would be in that regard. But it's like I said, going to be exciting to see how Worthy develops in year two, and just how some other players potentially fit into that mold. But with that being said, as well, like I mean, the wide receiver core up to this point, I think, has shown a tremendous amount of depth and chemistry with Mahomes. So exciting just to see where that progresses to get to week one ultimately. And then to the exciting part of training camp, or the whole point of training camp, in my opinion, is those positional battles, and where do those fall in the kingdom, or who are the players to be on the lookout for as you're watching these preseason games. But I've already kind of prefaced up to this point, but we know that the Kansas City Chiefs drastically changed the landscape of their O-line. Well, I wouldn't say drastically, but two-fifths of it they definitely got rid of, and are having some ongoing position battles with, to figure out who those guys are. I mean, everyone knows they had sort of a swinging gate at left tackle last year. They moved on from Joe Tooney at left guard, have made Creed Humphrey the highest paid center, Trey Smith the highest paid guard, and have Jawan Taylor returning. So Up to this point in camp, what I've seen is the rookie first rounder, Josh Simmons, who they took with pick 32 out of Ohio State, has been as advertised as a stalwart left tackle, and he has already seemingly won the job for left tackle, and it's his to lose at this point, and he has taken every snap with the first team. So really that leaves the question mark at left guard and who will be right tackle, because up to this point we've been seeing Kingsley Sumamaitea as well as Jalen Moore, the free agent they signed from San Francisco, competing for that left guard spot. But at the same vein, we've also seen Jalen Moore sort of competing with Jawan Taylor for right tackle. So um, that tells me that they've got left tackle, center, right guard figured out. They're trying to see what they have in Kingsley Sumamaitea for left guard, and that kind of would leave Jalen Moore or Jawan Taylor as the odd man out, just depending on Taylor's health and just how Moore looks, up through the point of preseason. But either way, I mean, that's not a bad problem to have if you have 6 starting caliber linemen and you can't figure out what to do with them. So, it's like I said, not a bad problem. Exciting positional battles along the line, and you got to think that if Simmons is as advertised and Suma Matea can figure things out at left guard, or they trust him, those are going to be improvements from how this line was last year, which would in turn give Mahomes more time to be explosive in the passing game. And the next kind of exciting battle in the preseason here is sort of that back end of the wide receiver core. Like we obviously know, Xavier Worthy, Hollywood Brown, and Rashee Rice, when he is able to play, are sort of your locks for your core receivers there. But then, I mean, that leaves Jalen Royals, rookie, they drafted, Juju Smith-Schuster, Sky Moore, and now Taquan Thornton, all sort of vying for those, those last 3 to 4 spots, and figuring out who will be the wide receiver core. So, again, kind of a lot of turnover in the wide receiver room. Thornton himself, seems to be kind of the bright shining star of preseason up to this point, really building chemistry with Mahomes, really showing his speed and deep ball skills. So it'll be exciting to just see how that core shakes out as we progress through preseason games, see who can put it on film against a different opponent, and who can ultimately contribute in special teams, because that is pretty important to making the team if you're in that back end of a core. And then another battle, or not really battle, but just sort of figuring out who's going to be contributing is, ultimately the pass rush rotation for the Chiefs defensive line. We know they have Karlaftis, they got Chris Jones, but then it's a lot of like figuring out who's going to fill in between there. So, Chiefs ultimately are looking for players that will step up and provide consistent pressure, in the pass rush game. You're looking at players like Charles Omenihu, Mike Dana, Felix Ndike Uzoma, and Darius Philon, competing to kind of be those edge rush rotational guys. And then on top of that, you got the rookie who I've talked about a few times up to this point, but Omar Norman Lott, getting significant first team reps aside with Chris Jones. So all exciting to see how that shakes out. But a good, exciting group of guys battling to be contributors nonetheless. And then finally, this one's just kind of for fun here, but not really a tight end battle per se, because we all know Travis Kelce is tight end 1 until he decides he's done. But that they did sign Robert Tonyan this last offseason in free agency, and he's reportedly been having a pretty strong camp up to this point, and arguably competing for some first team rep time in that tight end rotation. And I only kind of note it because that significantly impacts, Noah Gray, who they signed to an extension and kind of had a bright 2024 season, as well as Jared Wiley, who's a guy they drafted decently early and unfortunately got injured last year. And, Britton Stool, who they signed as a UDFA with some potential promise. So it'll just be interesting to see how that shakes out as well. Who will be kind of that tight end 2 behind Kelce, which has been a position that's been pretty important in this Chiefs offense the past few years here. So, those are our big positional battles. And then to the meat and potatoes of, why we're doing this video is previewing these preseason games here. So Week 1 coming up here pretty quick. Chiefs are playing the Arizona Cardinals in Arizona Saturday, August 9th. Ironically, I guess it's just because it's a preseason, so Vegas and the gamblers can throw a little shade KC's way, but the Cardinals are a 1.5 point favorite. But not much to be said to that because it is the preseason. I do expect the Chiefs starters to play, but not for very long. At least the main starters, probably like one series. But I think the overall theme for preseason is just you're looking for these younger and fringe players to elevate their game from what we've seen in camp. So some players that I'm watching. First and foremost, I've already mentioned him a few times, but I'm definitely watching Tyquan Thornton and what he does in an actual game. He's got all the intangibles to be excited about. 4.2 speed, pretty big framed guy, former second round pick from the Pats. He's been crushing it in shorts and shells, in training camp, but you need to see what he does in game action. And he's, potentially looking at being that 6th, 7th receiver in the room. So we need to see what he does in game, and he's going to get a lot of targets in this game. And you also want to see if he can be a special teams contributor, because that would help sort of lock up his roster spot if so. Another group I'm watching is just really the entirety of the offensive line, because I kind of am curious to just see how the rotation plays out. Like how much does Josh Simmons play? How much does Kingsley play? Do they give Kingsley time at tackle? What do they do with Jalen Moore? And, just sort of seeing how that rotation goes and finding the 5 that work the best together, as well as just finding some quality depth that you would ultimately find in a week 1 preseason game. And then, the final player I'm pretty intrigued to see what he does is cornerback Noel Williams, who, has been dealing with some injury concerns in training camp, but he was an exciting prospect when they drafted him out of Cal. He, has great, Chiefs overall have great secondary depth. But they are an injury away from having to thrust the younger guy into the fold, and that's something we've seen him have to do the past 2-3 years with, ironically, a corner, going down and someone having to kind of step up, and they've been able to do that. And I think Noel Williams is kind of the next line in command here to be that type of guy. And you look at what he did at Cal. I mean, he was an interception machine. He has great ball hawking, ball tracking skills. And, I point them out because those are things you can't necessarily value or see how it does in practice when you know what's going on or you're doing simulated drills. Those are things that come out in game action. So excited to see what he does when he gets out there, and if he can create turnovers and, work his way up the depth chart, or just getting into the starting fold. And then, obviously, like, I'm just excited to see this whole rookie class as a whole and see how much time each of these rookies get, talking about Ashton Gillott, as well as Jeffrey Bossa, Jalen Royals, Norman Lott, and Brashard Smith, the running back. But a lot of young guys that are going to be getting a lot of work, and I'm just excited to see that overall. But, that covers our training camp recap of the Kansas City Chiefs up to this point, ladies and gentlemen. As always, please be sure to hit that subscribe button down below, like the video. Chiefs Kingdom, Chiefs haters, let me hear from you. Hit your comments down below on what you're looking out for in this preseason, what position battles you're excited for, or if you think I just missed something when looking at this. I would love to hear from you guys. But yeah, that wraps up this video, ladies and gentlemen. As always, if you want to get at me or any of the other Hit Squad members, boom, there's our stuff across all social media, as well as if you were looking for more Lockdown Defense sports content, boom, there's all the profiles that you can get anywhere and everywhere on your smartphone. But yeah, so that concludes the Chiefs video. In the meantime, in between time, ladies and gentlemen, I'm the real AG. This is the Lockdown Defense Sports Network, and I ain't saying you got to go home, but you got to get the hell out of here. Peace.